The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, everyone. Of course, it is exciting to be here with you because I'm with y'all. So I hope so that you're continuing the kindness circle that we always have talked about. And I want to share a story about one of our audiences who reached out. The gentleman's name is John, and what John shared was that they had unexpected snow. Usually he is in Georgia area, so just recently they had ice, snow, and then he knew that an elderly couple lived next to him, and they had a couple of falls that year. So what he did was he had already talked to them ahead of time and said, anything that you need, let me know, I'll get it for y'all. And even though the couple had bought the groceries and everything needed, but they needed something to be picked up, and John went ahead and picked up and delivered to their door. And it's so beautiful to do that because you're just giving that time, being kind to somebody else with no strings attached. So do that. And I want to thank each and every one of you who have got our books, because I'll share with you, not just because I've written it, but our readers have reached out to us. They have changed their lives, and also part of the proceeds go to kiva.org. So if you have not got our books, do get our books. I'm sure you're seeing a couple of them in the background. Entrepreneur's Garden and Expert to Influencer. Do that and help us help other entrepreneurs. Let's welcome our guest. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be here today.
Great to have you. So, Carl, usually we start out with a childhood or a youth story. Is there a moment or a person that left a positive mark on you?
More than one, for sure. I grew up, I had a pretty tough actually upbringing. And so I didn't actually get these from my mom and dad. There was actually, typically we were getting that positive resource from somebody from the outside. Mm-hmm. And one of my good friends, dad, he had success in his life. And he told me two things, which really made a huge difference. He said, one, as you're thinking about, this is getting closer to graduating from high school. And he said, Carl, get a degree and people think they know what you know. and that was really insightful. And then the second big thing he said, get a great first job. And meaning that, really try to go somewhere where they're going to train you to be great at what you do. And those two things were really, I actually share that with multiple other people I meet with, and especially young people in their careers. And once again, there's a lot of different ways to quote unquote be successful, but that message to me was really impactful for me in my future and being able to provide for my family and to help others out as well.
Absolutely. It is so powerful because it's setting you for success right from the get-go. So tell us how did that teaching impact you, and where did your life journey take you?
So I attended the University of Washington, and I actually came down to three different ideas I wanted to potentially do. I was like, one was be a teacher. That was one of the ideas. Second thing was going to engineering, and third thing was to go into accounting. They all fit within the concept of these three degrees or something that I thought I'd get hired from, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I ended up through going through classes. I had this really fun and joy. Who knew that anybody could love accounting? And I found out there was Professor Sevchek at the University of Washington was an amazing professor, and he just this is going to sound interesting to you. When I fell in love with numbers, and when I found out everything wasn't black and white,
Mhm.
it actually required judgment and being
Mhm.
rational and to think through different ideas around it. And that's when I fell in love with the profession. That because if it was just black and white, I was like, well, a computer can figure that out. But
Right.
when you realize there's judgment in making decisions, that's when it became very, very interesting. So that was really, really impactful of me moving forward, going to the accounting profession. And then I ultimately, good news. I was like, okay, well, you want to go hard. The good news with accounting is they recruit you if you're doing well with grades. And so I did pretty well with grades. The process I did the process of meeting with other people, and I was able to get one of the back then big six, now big four firms. There used to be Coopers and Lybrand, now it's PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I was able to be with one of the largest global accounting firms in the world, and one of the best things University of Washington is one of the usually typically top 20, 25
Mhm.
business school accounting program. But the reality is in a hard term, you're taking 15 credits, right? Or maybe 18 credits. That's literally 15, 18 hours, excluding study time. When you go into public accounting, you're probably working 65 hours a week plus in the busy season. So I learned more in that first 6 months than I probably learned in all of my 4 years at the University of Washington. And it was hard and it was brutal. And I didn't like every minute of it, honestly. But
Right.
it teaches you so quickly how to be more effective at what you do. And that's once again why I recommend people, if they get that opportunity to be at one of the best places up front, you get trained by some of the smartest people in the world who've already thought through how to train you better than you could be trained. And once again, it just puts you ahead of the game, right? Ahead of the curve in terms of people just start out in a general job opportunity.
Absolutely. That is so powerful. And as you said that you didn't like it, and I can share with you, like one of my initial jobs was very much the same. And here's what I'll share, like, especially if you're working for a startup, you learn in dog years.
Right.
You end up learning so much that it's like, I've only worked for a year.
That's right.
And that sets the foundation. So it is critical that you get into that first right job. So there's so many professionals, right? Like, okay, you've got a good job, but then sometimes it is keeping up with the Joneses. It is, so we're going to, like, let's look at it from two different perspectives. One is from an organizational perspective, one is from an individual perspective. So let's say we're talking about a young employee, they're in their fantastic job and now they're working so many hours that they don't even have time to strategize around their numbers. They're focused on their career. What would you tell them?
Mm. Well, it's interesting. It's so interesting. I literally am dealing with this. I've got four kids, and two of them are officially in the workforce now, and they're doing a great job at what they do, but they complain sometimes, right? Of like, this is hard, right? This is hard, and the reality is this is rarely do great things come from things not being hard. Now, I think there's a long-term perspective you have to recognize is this something I want to do forever? What is the minimum expectation of a certain threshold I should be learning before I consider leaving? Like I married my high school sweetheart. So I had a different perspective than a lot of young people who aren't married because I had somebody else to think about. And one of the problems is at the firm I was at, a lot of people didn't have their rings left on their fingers.
Mm.
And for me, having a hope of having a long-term marriage, I was like, this is really fun. This is really interesting, but I'm not sure if this is the best long-term place for me to be at.
Mhm.
And so when a recruiting opportunity came about, and after I'd earned my CPA, I was open to it because I recognized the place I was at was, it doesn't mean you can't. It doesn't mean people haven't had successful marriages going through public accounting, going through that process. It's just I saw so many people had lost it because of all their life and focus was in the 65-hour weeks of working at a large firm, right? And so I made that decision to leave, and it was one of the best decisions, but hardest decisions because there's so much pressure when you're working so hard and you don't have time to think. And this is where I think it comes down to is when you have those periods, going to your question, when you stop and think, well, you can't do it when you're working 65, 70 hours a week.
All
You
right.
can't. You can't think. It's just, you're just surviving. But when you do have that break, it's super important to think about, where do I want to be 5 years from now? Where do I want to be 3 years from now? And so you start thinking about making those decisions of switching, or staying or going even deeper because you really love what you do. And I think that decision making is super important in any person in a young career. Once again, I think, what is the goal? Where is the end? And you have to be, at some point, you have to enjoy the process, even when it's hard,
Yeah.
right? Because sometimes we get to our destination and we're not happy, right? We've got there, we've arrived, and it's like, well, what happened the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years? And so, but I get concerned when I am a little bit different. I'm not a big, huge believer in what I call work-life balance. Let me explain that for a moment. I think people believe that things have to be equal. That's not how life works, right? Life is not equal. I mean, even the reality is, if you work a typical 40-hour week job, a typical quote unquote corporate 40-hour week job, um, that's way more time than I'm spending at home by
Yeah.
definition, right? And so at least waking hours, right? And so this concept of balance, I think, is wrong. I think what's important is you determine where you want to be great at. And when you start getting a place where you could become wonderful and great at a position or a role, I think that's when joy starts coming in, right? When you actually find success in how you do things. And that for me is when you get to that, it's very rewarding because, like, wow, when you start becoming, once again, what I call quote unquote an expert at something, right? But the problem is you can't become an expert on day one. It takes time and effort to get there. So that's the hard thing, right? Is that's why I go back to, is where do I want to be 3 to 5 years from now? And then being willing to put in the hard work, and what you hopefully can measure success along the way, how you're getting closer to that arrived destination where you're enjoying the journey, but you're really trying to get to this outcome of expertise success where you feel like you quote unquote are where closer to where you want to be.
Mhm. So what I'm hearing is having that vision, like, okay, what am I working towards? What is my North Star? And when you're clear about that, then it's very easy. Well, it's not, it might sound simple, but it's not that easy. And yet, if you have the roadmap, you're able to create a roadmap where you begin with the end. And then that can be your financial, your personal health. And I absolutely agree with you in that you cannot balance it out. I always like when I'm talking with my clients, I'm saying that find that work-life harmony. It might be that, especially as you mentioned in accounting, there may be seasons, like especially during the tech seasons, you're going to be very busy, but then during the summertime, you can harmonize by like, taking more downtime during when there is the seasonal downtime. And so from that perspective, let's say, so you've talked about the work perspective. What about the financial perspective? What kind of strategies those young ones can have?
Mm. Well, I think just like your life of where you want to be from a career perspective, that should come in line with where you want to be from a financial perspective.
Hmm.
And this is once again, they have the data. I don't know where exactly at, Divya, with inflation and everything, but I think it's around 85,000 or something like that, or 65 to 85,000 is where once you could pay for your basic expenses, getting beyond that, you're not any happier. Okay. Now, this isn't always, once again, people argue with me. What do you mean by that? What I think what I've appreciated is when I've developed what I really love is having freedom. And when I've recognized when I get really good at a job and I'm really getting things done, it actually creates more freedom because people can trust that I'm going to do the work that they do. So I do recommend that people have quote unquote whatever their financials or goals are going to be. I'm also a believer people should set some stretch goals because it's amazing. You could push us sometimes harder, 5 or 10% more, and get so much more out of that outcome, right? Just by spending a
Mhm.
little bit more time, not a lot more time, just a little bit more time, one more call, right? Staying 5 or 10 minutes later to make sure you finish the project as opposed to it hanging through the entire weekend, right? But to ultimately get to this, whatever your financial result should be, I think is absolutely critical. To once again get to where are you trying to arrive at. And we also, I grew up on financial assistance, government financial assistance. As I mentioned, I did not have um, the best upbringing, but we've raised all of our kids that our goal for them is to contribute more to society than they take away from it.
Mhm.
And since I've graduated from college, I have not taken any financial assistance, and I never plan to take any financial assistance from the government. And my
Mhm.
hope is once again is to quote unquote give more than take away from it. And that for me is one of those goals I think we should be having as people is don't rely on the government to save you, so to speak. It should be so you should be able to be self-reliant. And more importantly, if you have the means and the capability, you should have being able to provide for others. And that to me is whatever that threshold is for you. Now, one more thing, an important aspect is you shouldn't feel bad making a lot of money.
Agreed. Because here's the thing, as you mentioned that, and what a noble goal and noble values to pass on to your children. That I was in a very similar situation. You said, don't feel bad about making more money. So initially, like, when I transitioned from the corporate job into my coaching, I would feel bad, like, oh, this is something I should be helping people. And one of my coaches told me something very powerful that you gotta keep the lights on in your home and think about it. If you know that you can keep your lights on for like next 10 years, then you can go and help out a whole lot more people than not. Because now you have the freedom and not the worries to worry about what's my next year going to look like.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And the other part, which is one of our goals here at 40 Strategy and with 40 Accounting is we want to give over $1 million to charity and through the companies and we're in progress of doing that. And well, we can't do that without making a lot of money, right?
Mhm.
And we try to give a percentage of our revenues to not just the bottom line but part of our revenues to charity. And so that is what drives me to earn more, to make more, is to give. And so that's the way how I approach it. Once again, other people, I have no problem once again of people who don't, if they choose not to give. That's these are personal decisions for people, but for me, I know I feel better when I get to do that. Some people have the gift of doing the things that I wish I had the compassion, the empathy for, which I don't. I'm one of my gifts is to be able to create businesses, add value in businesses, and to help create wealth. And so that's what I love to do. And then I get to then pass along those profits and gifts to others for them to do what they're great at, right? For the things that I'm not um, best in the world at, if that makes sense. And so
Absolutely.
that's where once again that's what rewarding me. And then I also try to create a connection with these organizations where it matters, right? Where what they're
Mhm.
doing, what we're trying to. So it's not just blind money, so to speak. It's like engaged relationships, right, with the people and connections that we're helping provide for it. And that's, for me, is what helps bring a lot of joy.
Absolutely. And you bring back to the point, like, you were talking about 65, 85,000. After that, it doesn't bring you joy. At the same time, let's say it's not about the money, it's about giving back, it's about the impact. And when you are creating impact, it automatically brings joy. So everything that you have shared does apply to anybody, regardless, whether people are getting ready to retire or they're in the mid-season. It's about setting that vision and working towards it and narrowing down your values, what is going to be the charter for your life. So we've looked at from individuals' perspective. What about from organizational perspectives? What strategies that they can have? Because I'll tell you one thing, when people are laid off, I've been very fortunate I wasn't laid off. I made the choice to transition. But I get so many clients who were earning multiple six figures and all of a sudden, they are let go. So what strategies can organization put into place that people are not the first cut?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. And um, it's interesting question behind that of like what, from an organization perspective, does the owner have a duty, right, for their employees, right?
Mhm.
And this is the weird part. When an employee gets an opportunity to go somewhere else, there seems to be no problem with that,
True.
right? So when
Right.
an employee gets an opportunity to go and take somewhere else, there's a difference, I think, between smaller and larger companies. But at its core, organizations have to successfully generate profits, right? Otherwise,
Mhm.
they're not for profit and they can't actually perform and grow and do the things they need to do. From the employee side behind things, and of course, this depends on the different type of organizations that there are. I do think there's somewhat of a responsibility on the employer side that they should be developing, they should ideally have an organization where they're trying to develop people and to help grow them, but also recognizing that not everybody's going to stay through the process, meaning we have a duty, I think, to help grow people and give them the best opportunities to help them move through for where they're going to accomplish. On the flip side, is the employees have to return that favor, right? And this is going to sound bad. Well, that's the truth, right? Gallup says about what? Gosh, I haven't seen the latest data. Is it 30% roughly? Let's just say, roughly 30% of employees are engaged, fully engaged at work,
All right.
right? So does an employer have a duty to maintain the 70% of unengaged, non-engaged employees?
That is a really good question. And that kind of comes back to, yeah, forming that symbiotic relationship. So it's not just the owner's responsibility. The way I see it is that it's a handshake, just like a hug. Any of that, both the parties need to be involved and be engaged and be committed to each other. So when I asked you the question, what strategies they can put in places that it's not about not letting go if people are not working in, because as we know, companies are for profit, they're not nonprofit organization. And even in nonprofit organization, their operating costs are so high that the actual money that reaches to people is quite less if you were to look at it in the big scheme of things. It is about those employees who are engaged and who are committed, who are not hopping. And then it could even be that they're not expecting that curveball.
It's one of the, I think, toughest things that happens, especially in larger corporations, is when corporations will use a reduction in force to get rid of highly effective but highly paid employees,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's when it's the hardest hit, is when somebody's doing all the right things, but they've grown up in the path of the chain and they're just making too much money
Mhm.
for the employer, right? In terms of things. And that's tough. I mean, I have had multiple relatives and people that I know closely have gone through that. It's like a divorce almost, right? When you get laid off for the first time, it's this very personal rejection, right, of who you are. It
Absolutely.
feels,
And so
you
many
know,
people identify themselves with their jobs. And
that's
yet,
right.
as you mentioned, that 30% of people are moving from one job to another, and yet people do take pride, as you mentioned, if people are growing. So in that kind of a situation, I would say that, provide resources or have some form of course, employers cannot say you're making too much money, so we are going to lay you off, because
Well,
then the
they don't
employee is
say
going
that.
to
They never
come.
say that, Debbie, right?
No, then the employee is going to come and sue them. But the key is like, educating people, like, what are the tiers? So that way it is kind of understood, like, and then the employee also, then this goes back to both sides. You said, what is the responsibility of an employee? So also employee kind of being aware of like, what is my limit over here? Like, yes, I want to grow because millennials and Gen Z, they want to grow really fast every year, every 2 years. Like, I want to get promotion, which can lead to empty suit syndrome. But the key is like, both sides being aware. Like, okay, am I reaching to a level? So does that mean that I need to be on the lookout? So that's the whole where the key is, because you dance in strategy. So having that strategy, both for organizations and the professionals.
Yeah, it's interesting. Look from the employer side, right?
Hmm.
Um, there's value in keeping great people as long as you can.
Hmm.
To have what I call, the appropriate, when you can keep highly engaged employees to low turnover because there once again is that truly symbiotic relationship, which things are win-win, right, for each of them respectively. That's what all companies should be moving for. I mean, the goal from an employer standpoint is they're increasing that engagement, right, to the people that they have in
Hmm.
the organization, right? So they are engaged. This is where once again I think companies make a mistake, is they don't try to make sure engagement at all levels, not just at levels that are the senior most positions. Like, why not having opportunities on the other side? And then, as I'm saying this truly, if we can't continue to grow somebody, as I said, it's part of our duty as an employer to help share with them, hey, you have great opportunity. Have you considered education? Have you considered these other opportunities? How do we help make you be successful? Now, sometimes we have to, though, from an employer perspective, really look at what's in it for them. And I think most employers don't do this. So this is where I think they could get really deep engagement. And it's something that one of my friends, Scott Ballard, talked about. There's some great books out there that talks about this concept. But when here, let me give a quick example. So I had a friend, his name's Scott. He grew a company from his countertop with like $20 and grew it into an agency that had over 4,000 insurance agents across the United States over like a 20-year period. I don't know the exact period, 10 to 15-year period. And one of his most important people, his supervisor for the call center, was getting ready to leave.
Hmm.
And the person said, and for Scott, this was awful because he's like, I can't lose you. You're one of the most important people that I have in the company. And the person turned around and said, you don't even know why I'm here. And Scott said, what do you mean? You said do such a good job and you lead the team and this is a renewal time. I can't afford to lose you. And he says, well, you don't know why I'm here, he said again. So Scott's finally said, hey, look, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you. And he repeating, why am I here? And he finally said, and he broke down. He said, the reason why I'm here is I'm trying to provide enough money to pay for my daughter's braces so she could have straight teeth. That was his why. His
Hmm.
why had nothing to do with his own personal growth. It had nothing to do with his management techniques. It had nothing, no, it had to do with him having enough money to help provide for his daughter's braces.
Mhm.
And I think as employers, when we understand what's really the why behind the why, look, everybody's not going to be a CEO.
Right.
Not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur. But when we can connect with what people's real why is and provide opportunities so they can get to that outcome to help provide for their real why, that's when I think this whole different level of experience and expectation takes place. But you have to be willing to go down a path that most employers and most employees aren't willing to do because they don't fully trust each other, right?
Right.
And so when you get past that trust to get to there and use it for good and not for evil, right? When we go through this process, that's I think when companies are different, when they create different opportunities and create different relationships that are really a win-win for the long run. Those are the companies that have crazy high engagement, right? And have really good customer relationship scores and have a place where people never want to leave, right? That's what's awesome is when people create that type of company and that type of organization.
Absolutely. So you have mentioned that, your company wants to give $1 million in charity, and that is phenomenal. So tell us, I'm assuming that you have your team members. How are you nurturing them and cultivating them, and what's your strategy?
First of all, I gotta say I'm not perfect at this, even from my own perspective. And so I'm not throwing rocks out of a glass house. I think developing employees is challenging, right? And so,
Mhm.
um, but what I have found is one of the mistakes I've made in the past is sometimes I'll hire people to just kind of get things done without a whole lot of guidance.
Mm.
And especially when I'm busy, like I might be traveling around, meeting with other clients and doing other things. And I will say, oh, just take care of it. And what's interesting is I won't have as much engagement in what they're working on and doing. And for me, what I'm learning is for me to care more about what they're doing, even though I'm not directly responsible for it, from that aspect of where I can help engage them, critique them, learn and help make sure it's doing better. And that's something I said I'm still working on myself. I don't want to use this as a I've perfected this process behind it. But when I have had relationships where I like to have people have autonomy in their jobs. So I just to clarify, what I'm saying is I'm not talking about checking everything they're doing and watching over their shoulder, but to follow along and care about the quality of the work that they're doing. I think that does matter.
Of course.
And that's the side of us that I'm literally had made a change even this year where I'm actively working in our CPA business more deeply rather than being quote unquote just working on the business, but working in the business directly more because I want to make sure the company is set up and growing in the way that I think is going to best serve our clients. And to do that separated, do it away is not going to be as helpful for me, nor for our clients, nor for our employees. So that has been honestly a little aha moment I even had myself over the past couple months. And it's like, okay, I'm going to be more engaged and I do these things and not just quote unquote delegate it, but to be more engaged with what's taking place.
What would you say if I'm bringing your advice back to you? Is your vision for yourself with like for the next 3 years and for your company?
Yeah, so actually we're working that's really funny you said this one a book a very well-known book. It's interesting, because my life is doing strategic planning and execution, and then I have a CPA firm as my two things that I do. And so you'd think, oh, I'm really great at this. And it's amazing how hard it is, like anything, doing it on your own, right? Versus working with somebody else. This is why I've hired so many coaches throughout my career is to help give me independent feedback. Um, but just for multiple different reasons, that classic book, Think and Grow Rich, had come across my path. And there's this actually on YouTube, there's this great little 20-minute summary of it. And I am super excited because I'm developing a big, hairy, and audacious goal again for my business. So we've had a great first 5 years with the current businesses, but my goal is to, I want to make sure I get this right, but to 3x, just being 3x my personal wealth in the next 4 years.
Fantastic.
And so that's the big, hairy, and audacious goal that I have. And then beyond that too is to also give my goal, that $1 million, to substantially exceed that as well. And so that's where I'm heading towards. And it's I've never been more fired up. So I'm super excited. We have 2 businesses. As a matter of fact, I'm developing a whole concept of this strategy of 40 brand, where we can help provide and bring in services that fall underneath the brand, where we can help small businesses with and provide them to help create value. And it's super motivating for me. And I'm excited how we're helping out clients with. So there you go. That's our big, hairy, and audacious goal. And we're developing the plan. The plans are not fully in place. I'm developing as we speak. And if we'd had this conversation in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, the plan will be fully baked out. But I do have the general direction of where we're heading. So it's very exciting.
Well, I'm very excited for you and for your company. So if anybody from our audience wants to connect with you, learn more about you, where can they connect?
They can connect a couple different ways. First of all, once again, it's Carl J. Cox. Anyone who's listening, that's the best way to search from that perspective, CARLJCOX. You could, of course, do a Google search, but we have a website, 40strategy.com, as well as 40accounting.com. Feel free to go look at that information. And of course, you can find us on LinkedIn. That's where we tend to do a lot of information if you want to find that. You could also send me an email at carljcox@40strategy.com. If you want a free copy of my book, let me know. I'll be happy to do that. Lost at CEO, An Entrepreneur's Guide to Strategy. Feel free to send me an email at carljcox@40strategy.com. We'll be happy to send you a book.
Oh, fantastic. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Any last words that you'd like to share?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. You asked great questions. I love your insights, and I love it how you asked back. One of the hardest things as a consultant, right, is to go back and am I walking my talk, right? If that makes sense. And I appreciated you asking those questions throughout it. So thank you so much. It's been really fortunate to be on your podcast today.
Well, it was such a pleasure having you on our show and our podcast, Carl. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you, dear audience, for being part of our family, because without you, the show would not be possible. You are the soul of our show. Reach out, let us know how can we serve and support you so that you can live the best life you can. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible. Be well and take care until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.